about to start and have a conversation about the universe and all its complications. Step right in, we've been waiting for you to say that you're confuddled. Ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da. Yeah, we've been waiting for you, waiting for you.
Hello, you're listening to Confuddled, the podcast where we're all hungry, tired travelers in the dry Saharan desert, just thirsty for a few drops of good, profound truth. I'm Alex, and with me is...
Azul. This week I'm the host, and I'm going to surprise Alex with quite a different topic than we usually talk about.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I'm intrigued.
Well, first of all, I'm going to spin it up a bit, change it up a bit and not tell you the topic yet.
But how is it going to get, even more different than before? Because you've surprised me with some wild ones. You've surprised me with burials, first of all, which really took me by surprise. Great topic, by the way.
Thank you.
Robin Williams and zombies.
It's true.
How Shakespeare was wrong. How are you going to throw me off even more? I don't know.
I hope this satiates your desires to learn about something new because first of all,
yeah, okay.
I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and imagine what I'm going to talk about. I want you to imagine that it's 2:30 in the morning. You've just had a long day working at a bar and you're looking to head home in your red Fiat. It's late, but you're used to the way back and it doesn't take you that long to make it back to your apartment. It's 3:15 a.m. on this cold, dark March morning, and the darkness around you would have very well unnerved you if it wasn't for the fact that your apartment door was just around 30 meters from you. Besides, this particular area is quite a well-populated area that isn't really what you would consider criminally inclined. However, you do notice something that does make you halt for a moment. There's a man in the darkness looking in your direction. You take a deep breath and briskly resume your walk towards your home. After all, it's right there, literally within arm's reach, just around the corner. Suddenly the man grabs you and you scream. You see lights come on in the apartment houses on the opposite side of the streets in full view of you. The man stabs you and you scream, "Oh God, he stabbed me. Please help me, please help me." You hear a voice from one of the windows of the apartment. "Let them go!" The man hears this and leaves. You're bleeding and you're scared and in shock, and the only thing you can think of is to stand up. Maybe standing up will help. Maybe you can get home. Maybe you can call for help. The lights in the windows opposite go out and the man promptly returns. He stabs you again. "I'm dying," you shriek. "I'm dying." Windows open again and lights come on. The man runs away again, getting into a car this time and driving away. You're bleeding and you're barely conscious. You can think only of getting home where some semblance of safety or hope exists. A bus passes you by. It's 3:35 a.m. Miraculously, despite the blood loss, despite your shock, despite the tears and the paralysis of most of your conscious faculties, you manage to crawl to the staircase that leads up to your apartment. Unfortunately, as you lie there at the foot of your staircase, slumped against it in an attempt to crawl up, the man returns and stabs you a third time. This time, fatally.
That is utterly horrible and chilling. I'm really freaked out right now.
Most of the sentences and the words that I used were taken from the actual newspaper article about this crime.
That is just as horrible, because I have quite a strong imagination, and just picturing that is terrible, and just knowing that that's true as well, that just makes it that much more chilling. So that was a dark start to the episode.
So today's episode is going to be quite dark, but I hope to bring it to a satisfactory conclusion.
Okay, hopefully more satisfactory than the ending of that story.
This is fair. So the story that you heard me talking about is the story of Catherine Genovese. A lot of our listeners and a lot of psychology majors would know her as Kitty Genovese. The title of the article, if you can believe it, is 37 Who Saw Murder Didn't Call the Police.
You mean 37 people?
Correct.
See, that's the thing that freaked me out, is that the lights went on and people saw what was going on, but they didn't, and then they turned the lights off, I'm just going to go to bed after seeing that. How?
Yes, so allegedly the man who murdered Kitty Genovese came and stabbed her 3 times over.
Oh my goodness.
Somebody turned on the lights, he left. So he came back. Somebody screamed out, "Leave," he went. He came back. A bus goes by while Kitty was bleeding on the side of a street in full view of the whole apartment complex and stores and stuff like that. Admittedly, it was in the morning, but certainly the screams.
But, I don't understand why those people who saw it didn't go out and help her, A. But, I mean, I guess I could understand if they were terrified that guy was out there and they'd I don't want to go out there. But I don't see an excuse for not calling the police or an ambulance or something.
And that, Alex, is what we're going to talk about today.
Well,
It's called the Bystander Effect.
The Bystander Effect?
Yes.
Tell me what that is. Is that like the effect where you're so in shock at what's happening that you just can't help but freeze and you don't act?
The bystander effect essentially refers to a situation in which a certain bad or terrible or negative action is being committed in public or in front of a group of people, and those people do not stop it or call for help or don't do anything. The bystander effect is essentially why that happens. It's an attempt to explain why, as you said, the people didn't call for help.
That is so horrifying that that's so common that it's got a name for it.
Yeah. So if you recall, I said that the bus that passed you at 3:35 in the morning, if we give around 5 to 10 minutes to let the murderer come back and stab Kitty fatally, that leaves the time at 3:40. The police were only called at 3:50. That's a
Dear
whole
Lord.
10-15 minutes past that time.
Oh my gosh.
Apparently, when the police came to the situation, to that scene and talked to people, only 2 people were even outside after all of this.
So there were people outside who didn't go and help?
Oh, that is to say, when the police arrived, there were
Oh.
only 2 people outside. No one else had bothered to come out.
Well, I can understand if they were terrified of being attacked themselves.
That is actually a
I
fair
can
point.
understand
Yeah.
that. But still, it's still shocking. I can't speak for how I would act in that situation. I can't imagine. I don't know how I would act. Maybe I would have done the same thing. I hope not.
I mean, when I read the story when I was in university and I first heard the story, I was shocked as well. And I presume everybody who hears the story was shocked, because what would you do? And to you or me, I would imagine we first think, why the hell would anyone not call for help?
Yes.
And do recall that these people were in their apartments, nowhere
Yeah.
near the murder,
Yeah.
in the sense of not near enough to be stabbed themselves.
Yeah.
And they didn't even call the police while this was happening. The stabbing happened as early as 3:20, and the police weren't called until 3:50.
What? So is this a real problem? Is this something that first responders experience as an issue a lot, that people don't call soon enough?
Well, I think that depends on the country, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah, depending on what kind of first responder processes are available for the country and stuff like that.
Yeah, of course.
But to answer your initial question regarding why people didn't actually call the police earlier, the police were equally confused. They went around to every apartment and asked people why they didn't call the police. Do you want to hear what the answers were?
Let me guess. I don't know.
You hit the nail right on the head there. There were people who said, I didn't want to get involved. There were people who said, I don't know why I didn't call. There were people who said they were afraid of calling, but when asked why they were afraid of calling, they did not have an answer.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
Somebody else said it was a lover's quarrel. Another person said,
What do you mean a lover's quarrel? That goes beyond lover's quarrel. You see someone stabs... That's not a lover's quarrel. That's murder. What? How is that? So, oh, no, it's just a lover's quarrel. They get over it, the next day.
I think
it's terrible.
Yeah, and I think perhaps this is what may annoy you and actually cause you to get angry. I think
I'm feeling anger right now.
then this is going to put you off of the point of no return, because one of them responded, I was tired, I went back to bed.
What?
Yeah.
I was tired, I went back oh no, I see someone getting stabbed. Oh, can't be bothered. I'm going back to bed.
Really, that's it.
Is this episode going to make me lose all hope in humanity?
I guess we'll find out, shall we?
Good Lord. Okay.
To put a close onto the story, it was not until 4:25 when the ambulance arrived and when Kitty Genovese, the dead Kitty Genovese, was finally taken to the hospital. It's a tragic story.
It's horrible.
And it's a story that has been passed down for generations in psychology textbooks.
So it's
and
happened.
just-
This happened quite a while ago, then.
Yeah, I believe it happened in 1964 or something around that time. Regardless, it makes you question the thing. I mean, you yourself are questioning a lot of the aspects of it. Why didn't they call? Why did this happen? Like, how could this have happened as human beings? What would I do in this situation?
I know, right?
And I think there's a lot of factors that goes into this particular situation that we would need to look into before we can essentially pass judgment over the people who were present there.
Right.
Looking at the situation itself, can you guess why, from a philosophical or a psychological point of view, why these people didn't actually respond?
Do you know, I actually don't have an answer for that. The only thing I can think of is shock. But then you've got those responses like, I was tired. I wanted to go back to bed. That sort of challenges my thought that it's shock. So I don't know. But then you've also got, on the flip side, other situations that happen, extreme situations with horrific violence, or something's happening where people's lives are in danger, and you have amazing people that go out and help others as well. You have that on the flip side as well, who risk their own lives, and some of them maybe are not first responders or are not soldiers, for example. They might just be other fellow civilians, but they go and help someone who's been shot or something. You hear stories like that too, so I don't know what's the thing, to be honest.
It's a very good perspective that you're bringing into this essential situation, because there's no way of conclusively telling why these kinds of things happen. We know that there are a lot of factors affecting this. We know that ambiguity is a major aspect of things, and the consequences. Like, if you pass by a beggar who seems to be unconscious, what are the consequences of helping them? Will he mug you? What are the consequences of saving a damsel in distress? Haven't you watched like hundreds of movies, and in so many of those movies, haven't you watched that intrinsically unique, not unique really, intrinsically common situation where a guy or a girl rushes to the rescue of a damsel in distress or a man being chased by some people, and it turns out that it's a film set, and he gets screamed at, and he has to embarrassingly, with his tail between his legs, leave the situation. Have you seen movies like that?
Yeah, I have.
And it's, I think partly why people are so afraid to help each other is because of the social consequences.
Yeah, I can understand that. For example, if I'm on the street, I'm ashamed to admit, but I'm hoping to get better at this. Like if I see maybe a couple of drunks fighting or something, then of course, naturally I would want to keep away. So I imagine that if the situation had come up with one of them to get hurt, I'd probably run away and call the ambulance or something, because I don't know, wouldn't want to get involved in this situation.
Exactly, and don't beat yourself up on it, because I think we are socially conditioned to worry about these kinds of consequences. And in fact, ironically, so this case of Kitty Genovese, just jumping forward for a bit, because of this huge outrage that came after this case when the newspapers published this, actually, it's one of the main reasons why the 911 help network was set up.
Oh, so that was before 911?
Yes, this was before 911.
Oh, okay.
Kitty Genovese has been mentioned in pretty much every Psych 101 book in existence.
Wow.
She was essentially one of the major reasons why Australia, China, and most of, if not all, I'm pretty sure all 50 states of America have like these things called Good Samaritan laws that essentially mean that if you try to help somebody as a Good Samaritan because they seem to be in trouble, and you get in trouble, and you yourself get in legal trouble, then depending on the country and the state, you are allowed to not suffer legal consequences.
Okay.
And all of these things came into place because people knew that a lot of people were afraid of helping people because of the legal or social consequences.
Right.
Yeah. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of other things affecting these things as well, like group cohesion. Like, we have a tight group of friends, you would say, right, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think if we were going down the street and we saw somebody who needed help, generally, as long as the group is very cohesive, we have a high chance of helping them, because
I'd probably feel safer helping.
And the reason why that is again, this comes to social consequence, because we, being a tight group of friends, we're aware that we will not judge each other.
True, we can be ourselves with each other.
Exactly.
Right.
Just imagining going somewhere with like a group of strangers, like every single action you make is scrutinized. Every single action has the potential of being judged.
True, but then I think when it comes to values, I think those would be stronger. A person's values, for example, although in this case, I don't know, with this challenges that. Thanks, Azul, you're giving me another crisis. For example, if I were to see someone getting hurt on the street, I'd try and help them if I can. But then, of course, if there's the presence of potential danger, then I would think twice and try and find a way of helping from afar. I'd probably take out my mobile and call, well, 911 in the US, but 111 here. But I guess that's why this, like you said, that system was set up. So this was before any of that.
Yeah. I'm going to challenge that opinion. That opinion of yours.
Boy.
Can you tell me how many times you've passed by somebody homeless, just passed out near you and not called the police or like a hospital or an ambulance?
I used to do more of that in the past.
Okay.
I think I usually assume they're just sleeping or they passed out drunk. I haven't come across one who looks like he's overdosed on something.
Right.
But now I feel like I'm better, like I'm more... I've tried to train myself out of the conditioning of just ignoring someone who's homeless, which I'm ashamed I used to do, and now I don't. Yeah, so I think now I wouldn't do that as much. I wouldn't do that now, I think.
Right.
I hope.
In that case, I'm genuinely impressed. You may be one of the few human beings who actually does care about when people are around you are like in trouble. I unfortunately I like to think of myself as a good person, but there have been moments when I've passed by somebody who's passed out and I think, are they just passed out or are they sleeping? And
well, that's the thing. I assume that they're just sleeping, and then I also worry, if they're maybe on drugs or something, then if you if you try waking them up, then are you okay? Then you can't tell.
Yeah.
But if it's like very clear that they're passed out from being, I don't know, if they've been attacked or something, or they've overdosed, and you can see like if there's like, for example, vomit or something and they're passed out, then I'd probably be like, oh, maybe I should call an ambulance. But I haven't come across that enough to be able to give you data from my experience of...
That's fair.
But I do worry because I don't know. I hope I would do the right thing and I would be able to act compassionately for my fellow human being and do the right thing. But then now with this chilling bystander effect they've mentioned, I don't know. I hope I would. So
this isn't to make your life, to make your day even worse, Alex.
Swell.
This isn't the only situation that's been documented. Just with a simple Google search, I found several other significant events that happened. In 1998, a guy named Larry Froistad emailed approximately 200 people on a mailing list confessing that he killed his own daughter by setting his house on fire with her inside. Out of the approximately 200 people on the mailing list, only around 3 people ever reported the confession to the authorities.
What?
In 2009, in Richmond High School in America, there was a rape, and there were 20 people cheering, videotaping, and just egging people on to this like essential gang rape, and no one bothered actually reporting it.
That is absolutely vile and disgusting and revolting. How could that happen? I mean, in that case, I have heard of the mob effect. I think it's called the mob effect, or mob mentality.
Yes.
The mob mentality I've heard of. And I think maybe that might have something to do with it there. But then I would have thought that at least someone there would have said, look, this person is being attacked and is being abused right now.
Yeah, and I think...
I better stop them.
Yeah. I know the events that I quoted were from pre-2020, but let's bring it home. In 2019, last year, a young man called Kasim Morris was stabbed, and there were around 20 or 30 videos of this stabbing from the 50 or 70 people all around them, and no one thought of calling the police.
Now, do you know, that's a very interesting thing that you've brought up there. That again is horrible to hear, but I've seen that a lot, and I think that's a trend that's happened quite a lot, especially in this modern age, is that people now, when they see things happen, they instantly just film them. I've heard about, for example, there being like a house fire, and then a person walking by the house, instead of calling fire department, they would just film it. It's like this weird obsession we have with our mobile phones and technology that we need to film things. And it's this whole danger of social media. They've sort of got this weird dark obsession somewhere in our minds that we'd rather film something and post it rather than help. It's like we've got this weird separation with reality. And I think it's kind of a scary thing and a scary consequence of technology and social media. This seems to be something that does happen. People take out their phones and film first rather than intervene.
That's actually an interesting perspective to it, because while I think social media definitely has, or being behind the phone definitely has a major aspect to it, I think considering the fact that a lot of these cases also happen pre-mobile phone, like everybody has a mobile phone times as well,
Yeah.
while it does apply to the more recent ones, don't you think there's a commonality between groups of people not doing things and bad things happening? The mobile phones are just the newest thing.
That's true, actually. That's a good point. But it's kind of like a weird dark evolution it's taken with mobile phones.
Yeah.
It actually reminds me of a Black Mirror episode. You know, the Netflix series Black Mirror.
Yes.
I think that was one of the. I think it was the first season where I think this guy was being chased, or no, this woman was being chased, I think. And then they had all these people just filming her with mobile phones and not doing anything when she's screaming for help. They just have these scary people recording.
I think the episode you're thinking of is called White Elephant. I could be wrong, but it...
wow, you remember the episode name, but yeah, I think that sounds familiar. Yeah.
Something like that. I
know there was a twist at the end, but I don't want to spoil it if someone hasn't watched it. But...
Guys, it's a really great show. You should totally watch it.
It's very dark, though.
Yeah. So let's analyze this a bit more. And actually, I'm quite curious, and I know I asked you this before, but given our discussion and given the discussion of a few factors that affect these kinds of situations, do you think you know why it happens?
I can't say I do, because I was hoping, and I've always believed firmly that in humanity's goodness. And I felt like I had evidence for that, and in the intrinsic goodness of humans. When you hear things like this, that challenges that.
It does. And again, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's countless other situations of like people getting killed or raped or murdered and no one calling or bothering to bring help.
But then conversely, there's a lot of situations which don't get reported of people being helped.
This is true.
People coming together.
This is true.
People being there for each other, risking their lives, sacrificing themselves for each other. That happens too.
It does.
So I guess it's this really mysterious polarity in humans.
It is, and we're going to touch on that very quickly as well. And I think I can bring you an explanation to why you think that very quickly.
Okay. You tell me why I think that.
But before that, to answer your question, there are actually two major theories as to why this happens.
Okay, go on.
Well, the first theory is called a diffusion of responsibility. I'm guessing you can kind of get what they're implying here.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, the idea behind diffusion of responsibility is that essentially, for various reasons, other people may seem unqualified or afraid to help or
I see.
think that intervention is unnecessary because there are other people.
Yes, that's so true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you feel like the responsibility for helping is on somebody else.
Yes, I see.
Or you think that you're misreading the responsibility because you're not worthy of recognizing what's going on.
Do you know, actually, that's so true, because I've seen that happen, and I actually can't remember situations where this have happened, but I know I felt that.
Yeah.
Where I feel like, no, I'm not. But I've always been the person in the background.
Oh,
then
yeah.
I guess you always feel like the person in the background in these things.
You do. And two prominent social psychologists named Latane and Dali spent decades creating numerous experiments to analyze this effect. They did a lot of experiments with university students, and they determined why people don't help people when they're in trouble. Obviously, they used situations where the victim in this case, wasn't in mortal danger, but they were through the experiments they realized that the more people there are, the less likely people will help. The less cohesive the group is, the less likely people will help. The more empathetic people are. So they had a class where they talked about empathy to a group of people, and then they sent them out and saw them help a beggar. And the people who had the class before were more likely to help than the group of people who didn't have that class. So even inciting empathy within you causes you to be more willing to help people.
Very interesting. That actually makes me think about Jesus, actually. Because Jesus went against the norms of society in his time. He helped the marginalized and those who were cast out and people who he shouldn't have been associating with according to the society of the time. He was a revolutionary. And we do have those people throughout history who challenge society like that. We have strong, amazing people like that who can do that. And I think in this case, like you're saying, there's a presence of lots of people. I feel like there'll be a few of us who will be able to challenge that mob mentality and be like, this is absolutely wrong. We should be acting out of love instead of out of fear, and challenging these absurd and perverse norms that are present.
Yes, I should point out that there is a difference between diffusion of responsibility and mob mentality.
Okay, right.
The latter refers more to when you're in a group of people and you're all chanting the same thing, and then you start doing more extreme things again and again, and suddenly you're killing a person because you believe that they don't deserve to exist or something like that.
Right. Okay. So that was my mistake. I mean,
That's okay.
The diffusion of responsibility in this group setting. So I guess what we hope for is that people who are awake enough, because it almost feels like a trance.
It is. It's creepy how like entrenched you get into this idea that you don't deserve to help somebody, or you're not qualified enough to help somebody. Like, what qualifications are needed to just check on somebody and make sure that they're okay?
Yeah. I hope that there's people who are awake enough who will be present in a group when, if something like that happens, they'll be like, no, this is wrong, and then they go against the group. You know, like as I gave an example, like Jesus may have done in his time, and other many historical figures like Martin Luther King Jr. and Gandhi as well, who challenged, like, all these amazing leaders who challenged society and challenged the world when they clearly knew that what was occurring was wrong. And it was interesting that you mentioned the class and empathy and how that influenced people, because I feel that if we transform ourselves, if we work on ourselves, then we'll be able to be better people and be able to respond in these situations. I actually feel that philosophically and spiritually, we're inherently good, and we are made in the image and likeness of God. But I guess our atheist discussion can happen another time. But I believe in our inherent goodness, and when we're in touch with that, we're in touch with our real nature, which also in these they call their Buddha, your Buddha nature, which is inherently compassionate. They believe the nature of the mind is inherently good and compassionate and spontaneous. Then, when these situations come up, we can intervene. I guess what this is indicative of in all these examples you've shown me is how needed, I think, philosophy and spirituality is, and how much of a trance we're in is as society, and that we all need to wake up, and these sort of perspectives, philosophical perspectives and teachings wake us up. So I hope that is the case, because I feel in my experience that is the case, and I've been in situations like I was on the bus the other day, and the bus started moving while an old man was still finding a seat, and he fell over, and instantly people came and turned around to say, "Are you all right?" And I've seen countless situations of that, even just the last couple of years, where people go and check and say, "Are you okay? Are you doing all right?" So that gives me hope, and I feel, again, spiritual training, philosophical training, and training your mind as the Stoics would hope, and disciplining yourself would lead to a better society, because then people wake up from this weird trance of diffusion of responsibility.
Yeah, and that's honestly quite a delightfully optimistic perspective.
Well, you know me.
And I love that you obtained some semblance of hope, because I'm going to tell you the next theory of why this happens. And
swell, enjoy.
And the second theory does not, essentially, if you believe in the second theory, then everything you said doesn't matter.
Okay, bring it on, challenge me, my friend.
The second theory is called information overload. It was coined by a very prominent, I would say pessimistic only because he created a lot of experiments that showed us how terrible human beings can be. A psychologist named Stanley Milgram.
Right.
He asserted that the human brain has a limited capacity of the information that they can store, of current information they can store. So what happens is that the more stimuli there are around us, the more the brain will remove stimuli that should be important to us. So the more external stimuli there are, the less likely we're going to be able to help people. So he had a few experiments where he overloaded people's senses and compared that when people's senses weren't overloaded, and found that the more stimuli you have, the less likely you will be helping people. If that's the case, Alex, despite how good of a person you are, despite how willing to do good you are just a victim in the wonderfully pessimistic and information overloaded world that we live in.
Oh joy. But do you know what, actually I have hope still, because I actually wonder who he did those tests of. Most of those people would have been normal people, right? And I think it takes a few special people who are quite disciplined spiritually and philosophically. I reckon maybe they might have done better in those tests.
Probably, but some of these people were from churches, the other people were from psychology classes. These people were supposed to be the best of the best as well.
Oh my gosh, wow, you're really backing me into a corner here.
That isn't to say that there aren't people who are capable of focusing in on people who need help and doing it. But considering we are 7 billion people, what good is like 100 people?
But no, I don't think it's that drastic. Because, for example, we have foreign aid workers, we have people who help in war zones and who are used to those sort of situations, and they still go out and help people, and you still hear about heroic rescues, and even civilians who suddenly you get, like, maybe there might be a bomb or something, and they've never come across that before, and they instantly go to help out their fellow human brothers and sisters and try to save them. Even though, of course, that would be a situation which I imagine would be an information overload. You'd be in complete bewilderment and shock and horror.
So I should say that in most of the situations that you mentioned earlier, at least, these people are trained to focus on certain things like military personnel and help work.
So then training is possible to help.
Oh, most definitely. But you're essentially limiting the information overload by looking for things. So if you're looking to help somebody and you're put in a situation where somebody needs help, you will help them. But if you're going on your day-to-day life without having in your head, I need to help somebody, I need to help somebody, I need to help somebody, then the chances of you getting overloaded by information and not helping somebody is much higher.
Well, then that actually gives me hope again.
Oh,
because
do tell.
I'm determined to be optimistic. Because then, for example, developing yourself philosophically and spiritually, for example, if you're a Stoic, a modern-day Stoic, you are taught that all your actions should be acting for the common good, right?
Yes.
So, if that is your base for reality, if that is your base for your interaction with reality, that I have to act for the common good, or if you are religious in any way, you might be one of your base for reality, hopefully if you're a mature believer of your faith, would be that I need to help other people, no matter who they are, and my purpose is to love and serve. Right, so that's like your base level of reality. You won't be constantly consciously thinking that all the time, but that might be the base level of how you interact with reality. So that being said, you might be filtering reality with that lens. So then when those situations happen, you might respond a bit differently, hopefully a bit better than most.
You know, when I was thinking of presenting this topic to you, I was expecting one of two things. Either you will lose all hope, or you will cling to such a far-off shred of hope that...
That's not far off at all. How is that far off?
Well, the situation that you're describing is completely within reason.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's so very unlikely that there exists such a group of people. I'm not saying that they don't exist, but the number of people who you could completely and honestly say are successful Stoics are quite limited.
Well, I'm not saying they have to be perfect. I'm saying these people view reality through the lens of compassion.
Oh, certainly, but viewing reality with a sense of compassion is different from viewing reality with a sense of wanting to help somebody.
That's the same thing. Compassion would lead you to want to help somebody.
Yes, but... So we're clinging at strings here.
No, I don't think so.
The idea behind it is that if you live your life in such a sense as to provide as much compassion to people as possible,
yes,
you will still unfortunately be limited by this quote-unquote theory. And again, note that I say theory instead of like proven point.
Yeah.
Because at that point, who are you even helping? There could be so many people to help and so much happening.
Yeah.
And then you could be on the phone helping somebody in Africa who needs help while there's somebody that you pass who
True.
happens to be having a heart attack.
That's very true.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the fallibility of humanity, and that
is.
we're never going to be perfect, and we're never going to do things completely right.
It is. And unfortunately, in order for this to completely disappear, we have to be perfect, and we're not. We're just human.
I don't think we need to be perfect. We need to be whole.
Can we be whole?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'll start here to give in to you and say that there's more to the story that will hopefully bring more hope to you.
Great. And I also would like to add the point that there's probably more people than we think who are doing good and helping.
Oh, definitely. I'm not saying that there aren't people who are helping people. This topic is more in the context of in your day-to-day life where no one really needs urgent help. How likely would somebody be willing to help somebody who is in a situation that you can't even tell if they need help?
I just realised, I just really had a moment like, how optimistic am I? Like, I'm ridiculously optimistic.
You are
more than I
ridiculously
thought.
optimistic.
But I see your point there, and that's really interesting to bring up, because I guess that shows how the rat race of everyday life can be quite harmful in all these different ways, how we sort of get so bogged down in the rhythm and the routine of everyday life that we sort of numb ourselves and we're in a trance and we're sort of hypnotized. So I guess part of our duty as fellow philosophers is to wake ourselves up from this, maybe.
You are exactly right. And that's where the topic takes a bit of a positive turn.
Great. Okay, lead on.
So, Kitty Genovese's brother, his name is Bill Genovese. He teamed up with a director called James Solomon. I like that name, James Solomon.
It sounds like a great name to me.
Yeah. And earlier this decade, I believe, or sometime in the late 2000s or early 2010s, he released a movie that on the topic of Kitty Genovese and what really happened.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So apparently there were a lot of eyewitnesses who did try to do something. In fact, in the story that I mentioned to you, there was a man who did scream, "Let that girl go."
Yes.
And there were more. There weren't 37 or 38 eyewitnesses. That was fake news, as people like to say now.
Right.
There were a lot of people who may have heard them, but even then, the number of 37 or 38, which was later put into newspapers, is just a random number that somebody just pulled out of some random hole. And in fact, 2 neighbors did claim to ring the police, but the police claimed that they got no calls from them.
Interesting. So really, it's a lack of infrastructure and a lack of support services, I guess. Maybe that could be the case. And there's more to it than we imagine. And I guess that actually highlights the problem with media, which even to this day, there's a lot, I'm not saying all, but there's a lot of media outlets which focus on trying to get views no matter what. So what's more of a headline saying 37 people ignored a woman's cry for help or didn't do anything when they saw someone getting murdered, or 2 people and the rest tried?
It's incredibly interesting that you're bringing up this point, because James Solomon went up to the New York Times editor of the time at that time, and he asked, "Where did you get the number of 37?" Let me read to you his response. He said, "I can't swear to God that there were 38 people. Some people say there were more. Some people say there were less. What was true, people all over the world were affected by it. Did it do anything? You bet your eye it did something, and I'm glad it did."
So that sort of shows that he was trying to, it looks like for good, he was trying to make a point that this is a problem.
That is essentially...
And he's trying to bring it home.
It's a journalist way of saying that the number is fake. They just took it from a random arbitrary anywhere. And it's also a journalist's integrity to stand by that number, because essentially the end justified the means.
Oh, I hate that. The end justified the means. That's what Stalin used to say.
Exactly.
Right.
There's, and in fact, I encourage our listeners to go read about this because there's a lot of interesting things that come out of it. There's a lot of things that just make the whole situation become weirder. Like we wonder, like the fact that the murderer happened to confess to other murders, but those murders had already had eyewitnesses for other people killing it and other things like that.
True.
There were a lot of strange coincidences that happened around that murder that lead us to a conclusion that we really don't know what actually happened. But we do know that the idea that 37 people saw this murder and didn't help is irrevocably incorrect.
And do you know what gives me hope from this?
What?
The relentless optimist that I am is that people were outraged hearing that around the world. And that's a good sign.
I completely agree with you. I unfortunately also agree with the editor. I think if the story of Kitty Genovese did not get the media attention that it did get, a lot of things like these Good Samaritan laws or the 911 network would not have been created as early as they would have. And in fact, even her brother, who was the one who found out all of these details alongside the director, still stands by what happened, in that he believes that what happened was for the best. He can't he can't disagree with the good that this caused. I mean, obviously he hates the fact that his sister had to be killed.
Yeah.
I say had to be, but his sister was killed. But the good things that happened because of that terrible, atrocious event cannot be ignored.
I guess at least that, as horrible as her death is, at least there was some legacy that Kitty could leave and could sort of make the world better. It's sort of like a lasting, like almost middle finger to that killer.
Yeah, definitely. And I think here's some more good news for you.
Yay, I love good news.
And I think this will truly make you reconsider everything that I've said, trying to convince you that the world is bad.
Okay.
There was another study done by a psychologist named Philpott. It's quite an interesting name.
Philpott.
Yes, Philpott.
Sounds like an object, like put it in the Philpott.
That it is.
I don't know what that is, but it sounds like a great thing.
It is. Well, I think his work was definitely required for us because his study was titled, "Would I Be Helped?" As in, would anyone else walking down the street on a particular night be helped if something were to happen to us? That was the point of his study. Let me read a few sentences from his study, and I think this will definitely resonate with what you believe in reality.
Okay.
He started off by saying, decades of social scientific research has been concerned with the issue of bystander apathy and lack of safety in numbers during public emergency events, with the bystander effect hypothesis the epicenter of these discussions.
Okay.
Essentially, the bystander effect has been giving us a not so much rose-tinted, but perhaps like rotten-tinted lens to view all of these important and public events.
Okay.
Emergency events, to be exact.
Yes.
He goes on to say, in an effort to establish a veridical and ecologically valid baseline of intervention in actual public conflicts, we systematically observed real-life bystander behavior captured by public surveillance footage from 3 national contexts.
Okay. And what do they show?
They showed, and here is his conclusion, and this is what will make you smile, I am sure.
Oh, yes.
He said, this study said, we found that in 9 out of 10 conflicts, at least one person, but typically several, did something to help.
Oh, phew, that's a relief to hear that people did something.
It's an interesting situation how such a singular and terrible event has caused all of history from that day to now to change because of it. And now a lot of us think that human beings are intrinsically evil. Just to give you an idea, every single psychology student in the world learns about the Kitty Genovese case in their first year as a fact of life.
So they go around with the thought that humans are inherently evil, or not corrupt, but that humans are messed up.
Yeah. It's not the only experiment that proves this, but yeah, it's one of those many experiments that proves that human beings are screwed up.
And I think that sort of outlook can have quite a negative impact, especially on our psychology.
You're 100% correct, and it makes me wonder. Here's me asking you a question, Alex. How can it be that when this guy just arbitrarily took several countries, I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe it was America, China, and some Ukraine or somewhere in Russia.
Yeah.
Or it was America, Ukraine, and somewhere in Europe. He took 3 different countries, took surveillance footage from these 3 different countries, and compared all of these events and found out that 9 out of 10 times people will help you. And yet we have hundreds of cases of people not helping people. Why do you think that is? And this actually comes back to your very initial question where you were asking me, I don't understand. How are there so many people not helping people when there are so many people helping people?
Oh, please, I'm desperate for an answer.
It comes, and here is me answering you. It comes down to this thing called the availability heuristic.
The availability?
The availability heuristic.
Okay.
It essentially states that, it's also known as availability bias,
Okay.
but essentially states that human beings tend to use a mental shortcut when using examples to assert or conclude with certain things, when evaluating things, for example.
Right.
And generally speaking, the examples that stick in your mind are the most horrific and terrible examples. You don't remember that one time when somebody helped you. You remember that one time when somebody hurt you.
Why is that?
Well, consider a year, any year in your life, and how easy is it to take out the bad things that happen from that year compared to the good things that happen from that year?
Oh, for me, they're inseparable.
Really?
Yeah, I can't really take them out. Yeah.
Oh, how about this thing? Current events in the past 2 weeks. Can you name something terrible that happened?
What, in the world?
Yes.
Well, there's lots, but that's because of the bias of the news.
But is it
I
really
would
the
say.
bias of the news, or is it the bias
Because
of
again,
us?
well, yes, I think it's both. Because what the news takes advantage of this. Although there's a lot of good journalism out there, I do think that, and I've experienced this from working in certain news organisations, that they'll try and go with the headlines that are quite shocking and the stories that are quite shocking, because people are shocked by horror and terror and disaster because it's not natural to us. And that's what gives me hope, is that these sort of things are always going to be shocking. I don't want to live in the world where you hear these sort of stories and people aren't shocked by it. That's a world I wouldn't want to live in. But the fact that people are horrified in it, the reason why it sticks in our minds is because it goes against our nature, because we're inherently good.
I don't know if I agree with you in the inherently good, but I agree with you in the fact that for whatever reason, what we consume in the media tends to be mostly negative.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even go as far as to say that the media releases mostly negative news. I think if you were to release 2 news articles, one good and one bad, I think most people would definitely pay attention to the bad one.
Yes, because it's something like that shocking. Whereas,
Exactly.
Because it's so for them, oh, you should be doing something good, that's normal.
It's something that is so unlike you and me that it stays in our mind.
That's my point. Yeah.
And that is essentially the availability heuristic. Because it stays
Right.
in your mind, it is more visceral, it is more fresh. So when you're making a point or evaluating a problem, those are the examples that come to you.
Right, of course.
And unfortunately, that means that most of our decisions are plagued by negative events.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I guess that explains why we act out of fear a lot, and why we need a lot more discipline and training to try and act out of the opposite of fear.
100%. It explains a lot of things. It explains why some people can be racist because of one negative experience they've had with a certain group of people. It explains why people can be sexist because of one negative experience that they had when they were a kid.
But then you also get the opposite being true, where people who've suffered at the hands of those who've taken on these racist or sexist beliefs from those few experiences that they've had, they haven't responded with the same kind of hatred and bias. They've still, even with many countless negative experiences of discrimination, they still responded in a loving way. Take Martin Luther King Jr. and his non-violent protest as an example. And there's also just countless examples, especially with what's been happening in the world at the moment in Black Lives Matter. You hear many stories of people, not just nowadays, but in the past, who've responded peacefully and with the opposite of hatred, with love, and refused to take in these beliefs of separation and hate that these people have used in these mental shortcuts that you've mentioned. So I think, strangely, the opposite seems to be true. I guess we can't really crack humanity. It's just always a complicated mess of things.
Well, let me say this to that. You are correct in that there are a lot of minorities that have gone through terrible events and still act in a compassionate, mature way towards people of every race and color or creed. However, if you ask them, does racism exist or does sexism exist, they will wholeheartedly say yes.
Well, yes, but then I'm saying they're not giving into it.
It's a very good point, and I think it's a point that needs to be explored because you're right, there are a lot of things about human beings that don't make sense. And there are a lot of things that require more attention. I personally think that the reason why you don't see a lot of individuals from a lot of minorities subscribing to these hateful beliefs is because they just know about this society enough to know that this is how people who are racist act or people who are sexist act. I think in response to what you said, it comes down to social conditioning. Specifically, if we take America, because of social conditioning and because of the systematic discrimination that a lot of minorities face, it makes sense that a lot of them wouldn't grow up thinking that they themselves are more superior as a race or as a gender of some sort. However, if you look at other countries, you'll see different groups who are in power who actively discriminate against minority groups or basically anyone who seems different. For example, take these minority groups like the Kurds in Turkey, Christians in the Middle East, Muslims in China, anyone arbitrarily classified as not pure in Hitler's Germany, Japan's discrimination of non-Japanese, Native Americans in America, Indigenous Australians in Australia, and the Maori in New Zealand. I think the common thread between all of these discriminated groups is that they're not in power. And I think this plays a large part in why you don't see a lot of people in minority groups touting racial superiority. That isn't to say that no one in minority groups can insist that they're superior. That happens too. But the frequency is much less, right? Because it's essentially societal conditioning. When you spend your whole life being discriminated by society, hating a particular group of people doesn't really accomplish much. You have to either accept it or you have to fight against the very system that promotes that inequity. And when you're raised in such a society that touts your racial superiority, it's, at least I would say, that it's pretty easy to latch onto that one negative experience you had to justify all that brainwashing, right?
I guess the question is, and this could be further exploration in the future, how we decondition ourselves as in humanity, how we rise above these things. And we seem to somehow rise above it very slowly and painfully, and not fast enough, but we seem to slowly and painfully evolve. I feel like we've come a long way in the last 1,000 years, but I still feel like we've got a very long way to go, so I wish we'd evolve a bit faster. But I'm glad that we're starting to make changes.
Agreed. And I'm going to take a page out of your book and end in a positive note. Given everything that's happening in day-to-day life and all the negativity that we're facing, I think we as a human beings should just stand up for what's right. We should not remain silent. You mentioned Martin Luther King, and so I will quote Martin Luther King. He said in 1964, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." And I think that is important for us to remember. If you see somebody in the street corner lying down, afraid, hurt, if you see some injustice happening before you, rise up. Do not worry about the social consequences, because you are a human being, and Alex sincerely believes that you are inherently good.
You are inherently good and worthy. And
I am skeptical, but I can be convinced. So do good and convince me that you are good. Thank you for staying with us with this quite dark and at times hopeful episode. We sincerely hope that you're all doing well in these times of trouble.
Until next week. Hey guys, that's us for another episode. Thank you all for listening. We hope we gave you a smile and something to think about.
If you like this episode, please give us a rating on Apple.
Every 5-star rating goes a long way to help us keep going and reach more people. We really appreciate all your support.
You can find us on Facebook as Confuddled Podcast.
On Twitter at Confuddled_pod. That's CONFUDDLED_POD.
And on Instagram at Confuddled_podcast. Or just email us at confuddledpodcast@gmail.com.
We love hearing from you. Share your comments, queries, ideas, suggestions, lightbulb moments.
And your deepest, darkest secrets.
Maybe not.
So get in touch.
Okay, until next week.
We've been waiting for